Is it acceptable for you if I leave after the talk? This is my nap time, and I think that will keep me awake, but I think a guided meditation would be just too much of an problem.
Linda, during the questions, I especially welcome your good questions.
Thank you. Does that come?
Here, I'm going to give a talk for about 30 minutes and then have 15 minutes of questions.
Okay. That will help keep me alert too.
Let's just sit together for about 5 minutes. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Dear friends, this afternoon I want to speak to you about one of the important forces that keeps us spinning around in samsara, namely quarrels and disputes. If you only read the textbook list of the points of dependent origination, in other words, the standard list, you might not catch the importance of this. But there is a particular sutta, which is very old, which some of the Buddhist scholars say could have been the first and earliest expression of the dependent arising, even before it got, sort of formalized into the standard list that got memorized and repeated so many times. This sutta, okay, it's called, in one translation, it's called Disputes and Contention. It's in the fourth book of the Sutta Nipata, which is called the Book of Eights. And this is considered to be a very ancient book. This book is quite difficult to translate because it's more fresh and original in certain ways than, and not standardized like some of the later aspects. The Sutta Nipata has had it's become very popular recently. Within the past year, I think, maybe more than a year, Bhikkhu Bodhi has released his translation of the Sutta Nipata. And just a little bit before that, I don't know if it was just before or just after, Gil Fronsdal released a translation of this one section of the Book of Eights. I heard that Bhikkhu Bodhi was trying to get his translation to press sooner than Gil, because he felt that his translation was better, and he didn't want people to get the wrong impression of. There are many translations because it's so difficult to translate. There's about 16 or 17 different translations of the Sutta Nipata. The one that I like, and the one I'm going to read you, was published in the 1970s by Venerable Sadatisa, who was a Sri Lankan monk who was the chief of the Buddhist Vihara in London. It's a free translation, but I really trust Bhante Sadatisa as far as capturing the meaning. I'm just going to go into this, and I'm also going to save you the trouble of buying the book. Later on this evening or tomorrow morning, I will email you this particular sutta, which I could not find online, so I had to actually type it out into my computer in order to share it with you. So this is Disputes and Contention. Sir, said a questioner, whenever there are arguments and quarrels, there are tears and anguish. arrogance and pride and grudges and insults to go with them. Can you explain how these things come about? Where do they all come from? The tears and anguish that follow arguments and quarrels, said the Buddha. The arrogance and pride and the grudges and insults that go with them are all the result of one thing. They come from having preferences, from holding things precious and dear. Insults are born out of arguments, and grudges are inseparable from quarrels. So, pia is the things that are dear to us. This might remind you of the detailed description of in the Four Noble Truths, when the question is what is the arising of dukkha? And the answer is the I, O monks, is dear and delightful in this world. Whenever there is clinging to the I, then that is where suffering arises, and that's where suffering settles down. And then in that section, it talks about all of the six senses, the eyes, ear, nose, and the mind, the six kinds of objects, visible objects, all the different sensory objects, and the phenomenon apprehended by the mind. And then the contact is dear and delightful in the world. The consciousness associated with it is dear and delightful in the world. The feeling connected to it is dear and delightful in the world. The perception is dear and delightful. The volitions are dear and delightful. The thoughts are dear and delightful. The sustained thought is dear and delightful. All the different, any different point and aspect of mentality that's connected to the I is dear and delightful in the world. And if you cling to that, that's where suffering arises. So it's not only the dear and delightful, like your mother and your father and your baby and your brother and your sister, but it's also the dear and delightful as far as any point, any aspect of our experience in the world. And then in the analysis of the Four Noble Truths, the next question is, what is cessation? The cessation of dukkha, and where does that happen? And then the Buddha goes back exactly the same place. He says, "O monks, the I is dear and delightful in the world. If you don't cling to the I, then dukkha ceases right there." But if there is a clinging, this is going to come out in the sutta that I'm on now, then it arises and it goes down the negative spiral. So why, sir, do we have these preferences, these special things? Why do we have so much greed and all the aspirations and achievements that we base our lives on? Where do we get them from? The preferences, the precious things, said the Buddha, come from the impulse of desire. So too does the greed, so too the aspiration and achievements that make up people's lives. This is a translation of the Pali word chanda, which sometimes means a wish or a will, a decision. And from where, sir, comes this impulse of desire? From where do we derive our theories and opinions? And what about all the other things that you, the wanderer, have named, such as anger, dishonesty, and confusion? The impulse of desire, this is the chanda, the wishing. Wishing arises when people think of one thing as pleasant and another as unpleasant. That is the source of desire. It is when people see that material things are subject both to becoming and to disintegration that they form their theories about the world. These two sentences are so profound. Thinking of the pleasant and unpleasant, this is Vedana, what's called feeling. And many of us have done a lot of practice in the 4 foundations of mindfulness, learning to discern and try to be sensitive to the bare arising of Vedana, even before we start to speculate about it or to name it or to form theories about it, that which in our subconscious mind, in our habitual mind, that which we think of as being good for us, good for the continuing this life, we naturally open up and reach out towards and try to bring towards us whatever has that pleasant Vedana. And if there's at a completely instantaneous, immediate subconscious level or intuitive level, something which is a danger, a destruction, a catastrophe for our existence, then we would tend to turn down, close away, push away, or even try to destroy that object that strikes us, creating that unpleasant Vedana. But in this sutta here, he mentions that when people see material things subject to both becoming and disintegration, that they form, this says theories, that means distinctions about the world, the distinctions between pleasant and unpleasant. And I believe that what the Buddha is pointing to is that for us in this world, we're not like angels that are just in a world where everything is pleasant. Everything we taste is pleasant. Everything we see is pleasant. Everything we think is pleasant. Just nothing but pleasure. We're not in a world like that. We're in a world that has this mixture of pleasure and displeasure. And that mixture actually makes us become even more addictive. When you have an experiment with rats in a cage, and when they press the button, they get a treat. Okay, so then they will press the button and get a treat. But if you have the rats in the cage and when they press the button, they might get a treat or they might get a shock. The ones that might get either pain or pleasure are the ones who become addicted to the button and who will spend the whole day like somebody playing the lottery, just pushing the button all day long, trying to know whether they're going to get a treat or a shock. And so this is what the Blessed One pointed out, that the mixture of pleasant and unpleasant Vedana is giving energy to our addiction to the round of samsara. He went on to say, anger, confusion, and dishonesty arise when things are set in pairs as opposites. The person with perplexity must train himself in the path of knowledge. The recluse has declared the truth after realization. And these few sentences, this is why I'm going to email it to you, because you can read and ponder this for a long time. There's so much depth of meaning in just a few sentences. This sentence seems to be the centerpiece of the sutta. When you see what Vedana, what feeling really is, when you see the danger in setting it up as the pairs of opposites. You realize the danger in that. And that's when you're able to turn away from craving. But why, sir? Is it that we find some things pleasant and some things unpleasant? What could we do to stop that? And this idea of becoming in disintegration, could you explain where that comes from? It is the action of contact, of mental impression, that leads to the feeling of pleasant and unpleasant. Without the contact, they would not exist. And as I see it, the idea of becoming in disintegration also comes from this source, from the action of contact. So this is exactly in parallel with the traditional steps of dependent arising, a portion of the steps that's showing contact gives rise to Vedana. So what, sir, does this contact come from? The grasping habit. What's the reason for that? Is there anything that can be done to get rid of possessiveness and anything that could be eliminated, so there would be no more contact? The Buddha says, contact exists because of compound of mind and matter exists. The habit of grasping is based on wanting things. If there were no wanting, there would be no possessiveness. Similarly, without the element of form of matter, there would be no contact. So in that nama rupa, the compound of mind and matter, he's associating mind with the habit of grasping and associating matter with the element of form. And what pursuit leads a person to get rid of form? How can suffering and pleasure cease to exist? This is what I want to know about. Now, the Buddha describes meditation as a way of withdrawing the mind from the dukkha of contacting, of liking and disliking, of the reactions that are coming about because of Vedana. There is a state where form ceases to exist, said the Buddha. It is a state without ordinary perception, and without disordered perception, and without no perception, and without any annihilation of perception. It is perception and consciousness that is the source of all the basic obstacles. So it sounds like he's recommending the formless meditation as the way out of suffering. But if you stay with it, you'll see that that's not the complete answer. Sir, you have explained to us everything we asked you about. There's one more question we would like you to answer for us. Do the learned scholars of the world say that this is the highest purification of the individual being? Or do they say there is some other kind of goal? In the Pali, the individual being, the Pali word they use for an individual being is a yaka. The yaka normally means a mythological monster, like an earthbound monster. And calling, in this case, it's almost like when you're looking at the soul or the innermost self, if you believe in a self, that you picture it as being like a little monster that you have inside of you, or a spirit being that you have inside of you. And the Buddha rejects the premise of this question. There are scholars and authorities, replied the Buddha, who say that this is the highest in purification of the individual. There are others who maintain that the highest purity is to be found in the complete eradication of the material substrate of existence. And there is also the Muni, the wise man. Here's the answer to this puzzle. He has realized which things are dependencies, and he knows that these are only crutches and props. And when he has realized this, he has become free. He does not enter into arguments, and so does not enter the round of endless becoming. So in this beautiful and profound sutta, the forming of views that are arising from what we like and dislike, which is arising based on contact, and which is developing into views and opinions, and which is has like this underlying assumption, this underlying view of the experience being held or owned by an individual being. That whole puzzle is leaving one forever trapped in a realm of opinions and concepts. And while we're in that realm, we'll just have to be down among the scholars and authorities who are debating about the purification of the individual. But the wise man is not engaged in concepts. He's not saying like there is the unconditioned. He's saying that the conditioned, the dependencies of the conditioned world are only crutches and props. And then he becomes free. There's another sutta which is much more famous and more widely studied by students. Even I know that our little study group looked at this sutta recently. It's called the Honeyball Sutta, number 18 in the Middle Length Discourses. And that also speaks about the way that the world falls into quarrels and disputes. The opposite position from quarreling and disputing is the teaching of the Buddha, which doesn't conflict with anyone in the world. Perceptions do not underlie the awakened one, the Brahman who has detached from sensual pleasures, who is without indecision, stripped of worry, and rid of craving for rebirth in this state or that state. A person is beset by concepts of identity that emerge from the proliferation of perceptions. If they don't find anything worth approving, welcoming, or getting attached to in the source from which these things arise, then that will be the end of the underlying tendency to desire, repulsion, views, doubt, conceit, and the desire to be reborn. And that will be the end of taking up the rod and the sword, the end of quarrels, arguments, fights, accusations, divisive speech, and lies. And then further down in the same sutta, this is one where it's like a sutta about analysis. Okay, how do we come to this end of this underlying tendencies? And he comes back to this idea of the sixth sense base, a being with mentality and materiality. Eye consciousness arises dependent on the eye and sights. The meaning of the three is contact. Contact is a condition for feeling. What you feel, you perceive. What you perceive, you think about. That's vitakka. What you think about, you proliferate. What you proliferate about is the source from which a person is beset by concepts of identity that emerge from the proliferation of perceptions. And then this same thing is happening with all of the different sense bases. And so then this is the arising of suffering, and just the whole process. What I'm trying to emphasize today is that we're in a world where our culture is really beset by quarrels and disputes, divisiveness, polarization. And being that we're swimming in this world, there can be a tendency for our own mind to tend to become polarized between like and dislike, polarized between pleasant and unpleasant, polarized between our concept of good and bad. And this leads the mind to jump from, you could say, like there's a sort of like an authentic experience of a contact with something that we're experiencing, and the Vedana that's coming from that. And this is like it's natural, connected to reality. It has an authenticity. But then because of this polarization, the mind jumps into concepts and begins to spin out a proliferation of conceptual thinking and story making. And the more we're into that proliferation, the more we have taken ourselves far away from the authentic connection with reality. And this is how we suffer. This sutta in the honey ball, it doesn't give the entire list of the 12 points of the standard list of the arising of dukkha. Just the aspect about feeling, consciousness, the sense-based, internal, external, the consciousness and the contact, that triple conjunction arising and feeling, and then from feeling we're off to the races. That's got a close parallel in the 12 points of dependent arising. And then this sutta is developing it in a slightly different exposition, which is going towards the five khandhas, based on the five khandhas of existence, or the five aggregates associated with clinging. But nevertheless, this sutta is still about causation. So we want you to spend your next set of meditation trying to see how quickly or how well you might notice the arising of Vedana, of a feeling, and see if you can notice whether that feeling matures into like and dislike, matures into proliferation, or whether you can experience sometimes that a feeling is just a feeling. It just arises. We don't need to pick it up. We don't need to take it on board and make an identity with it. I would like to pause now and invite any comments or questions about quarrels and disputes.